member for Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise in support of the Mutual Recognition Amendment Bill of 2021. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I came into this place, I was a builder for 10 years, a qualified carpenter and joiner, and then I went back and did a law degree and ended up practising in construction law. So I have been intricately involved in the building industry for the last 32 years, either as a builder, hands-on builder, or as a building lawyer. I have reviewed a number of pieces of legislation on behalf of the Queensland Government and written a number of reports for the Queensland Government. And as much as I often in this place pay the Queensland Government out at every opportunity, I will not pay them out in relation to their licensing scheme in the building industry. We all know that the way that we administer occupational licensing, whether it be for carpenters and joiners or just about any other trade or business or profession, is very different between the states and territories. We are still a collection of colonies, 6 colonies, when it comes to occupational licensing, and that's to our regret. But when it comes to the building industry, Queensland has, in my view, in my considered view, the best licensing scheme for those in the building industry, bar none. We know that there are other states that certainly take a less approach. And I've heard members opposite, and indeed the member for Melbourne, talk earlier about a race to the bottom. And if this was a race to the bottom, I would be opposing the bill. I have fought all my professional life for better standards in the building industry. It's very important that we, I believe, have the best standards for occupational trades in this country. We've seen what can go wrong in the last few years with some of our building failures in New South Wales and in the ACT. What we don't want to see are those sort of building failures and shoddy building practices being replicated in other states. And this bill would not permit that. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But let's just talk briefly about the merits of this bill in the first instance. I've heard speakers before me talk about the merits of deregulation, the merits of just as we don't need a Victorian driver's licence when a New South Welsh person drives into Victoria. I think most Australians would understand that those are good things. We live in a federation. We want to try and, as best as we humanly possibly can, provide all avenues for businesses to be able to engage in work around the entire country. I don't think anybody would quibble with that. That is particularly so when we as a country are clawing, some would say rapidly in fact, our way out of this pandemic from an economic perspective. We need to be able to provide as many opportunities as we can for businesses to be able to compete on a national and indeed a global scale, but we'll start with a national scale. We need to be able to encourage Victorian builders. In fact, we will need Victorian builders operating in New South Wales. One of the beautiful aspects of this bill, particularly in times of recovery from natural disasters, is that we can surge workforces. When there's a natural disaster in New South Wales, as we've seen, and in southeast Queensland, in my home state, in my own home area, the reality is we don't have enough trades to be able to surge workforces without calling upon other states. We've all seen the way that works, say with the CFA or SES, we always call upon other states. The same thing happens in the building industry. When you have a major flood or a fire or a cyclone, we call upon practitioners, occupational licences from other states to come and help us out. So the concept is not foreign, and the concept is a sensible one. The concept will open up opportunities for occupational licensees around the country. It's a sensible provisions. Now, I want to return back to the concerns that have been raised by those opposite in wanting to refer this matter on to a Senate inquiry, because they say that there are concerns that some states don't have the same requirements of those practitioners, and by having this automatic mutual recognition scheme, that this would somehow lead to a race to the bottom. That argument would have some merit, but for the fact that Section 42S, capital S, provides a minister of, and let's talk examples because it's probably easier that way. Let's say that a commercial builder operating in New South Wales, and I think it's pretty well accepted that commercial builders in New South Wales do not need the same sort of rigour or meet the same standards as commercial builders in Queensland. Reiterating my views earlier that Queensland has the highest licensing standards of all of the states. If Mick de Brenny, who is the Queensland minister responsible at this point in time, if he believed that New South Wales commercial builders, that the licensing requirements for New South Wales commercial builders were unsatisfactory to allow them to be operating as commercial builders in Queensland, he could exempt those builders from operating in Queensland. Section 42S of this bill enables him to do that. And I accept that he may well do that in certain instances, and I just used that as an example, just for the sake of the argument. Mick de Brenny, the Queensland minister responsible for the Queensland Building and Construction Commission, could exempt New South Wales commercial builders from taking a commercial building licence or acting as a commercial builder in Queensland if he was of the view that by allowing those practitioners to operate in Queensland, it would be injurious to consumer protection or the environment or animal welfare or the health or safety of workers or the public. Now, that same principle applies across all of the occupational trades, whether it be an electrician or a plumber or a carpenter. If a state minister was of the view that a particular trade in another state or territory did not meet the same standards, then the minister could exclude that trade from operating in Queensland, for example. That's really important, because not only does that, as the member for Melbourne spoke about earlier, not only does that eliminate the race to the bottom, it does the opposite. It encourages those states that do have laxed standards, laxed licensing standards of their occupational trades, to lift their game. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can assure you that occupational trades in a particular state or territory, if they are made exempt by, say, for example, Queensland, those occupational trades will be onto their own state's governments to lift licensing requirements, to lift the standards so that they can go and compete on a national stage. It will have the absolute opposite of what those members opposite are arguing. It will not be a race to the bottom. It will lift the standards of all occupational trades. And that would be a very, very good thing, particularly in my world, in the building industry. But the same applies across all of these occupational trades. No one would quibble with lifting the bar rather than lowering the bar. Whether it's the building industry, whether it's a teaching profession, whatever it might be, we should all be aspiring to look at the nation's best practice. And as a practitioner in the building industry for the last 32 odd years, I can guarantee you that Queensland has the best licensing provisions, the best licensing standards. No, it's not perfect. No system designed or facilitated or administered by a human being is perfect. But it's the best there is in the country. And all the other states and territories will be encouraged by this bill to ensure that they lift their standards, to ensure that residents in their states can go on and compete on a national stage. Now, look, I haven't heard all of the debates in this place, but I imagine if they haven't done it already, someone will raise an argument, well, what's to stop someone from being a resident in Queensland who can't meet the tough licensing standards, going to another state or another territory that has lax standards and applying for their builder's licence or their electrician's licence or their carpenter's licence in the state that has those lax standards, and then going back to their home state and saying, here, I've got my licence from X state, I now want to be able to operate as a builder in what is in effect their home state. Well, once again, this bill prevents people from doing that under Section 42A. Under Section 42A of the bill, you cannot be a resident or have your, as in a principal place of residence in, say, the state of Queensland, or operate a business in the state of Queensland and go and get your licence in Victoria or New South Wales or Tassie or ACT. If you're a resident of Queensland, in that you have your principal place of residence in Queensland, or you operate your business in Queensland, that's where you've got to get your licence. So, these are really sensible reforms. And I totally get that those members opposite have some concerns because we don't want to lift or lower the bar. But I want to assure you that this is not lowering the bar. This bill's been considered. These concerns around lifting things up rather than lowering them down are contained in the bill. No one wants to see repeats of the sort of shoddy building work that we've seen in apartments in New South Wales. We don't want to see that replicated across Australia. No one would. This bill would protect, under Section 42A and 42S, from that sort of conduct. It's a sensible bill. It would enable contractors and occupational trades to operate without having to get individual licences in every state. That's a good thing. That's a sensible thing. I'm still a registered builder in Queensland. It costs me, $600 or $700 a year. I don't have to pay that in every state and territory in this country. This bill will prevent that from happening. It's sensible, and I recommend it to the House.
The question